Hello, this is Eduardo with a video on how to start a programming kata and how to apply that knowledge to a real-life work item. For this video, I'm going to use the Amazon and Surfing katas that I've created under my GitHub repository. The Amazon kata is under this URL, and the Surfing kata is under this URL if you want to check them out. I'm going to start with the Amazon kata as if I were doing a kata, but then I'll go on to the surfing. I'll do the full surfing exercise as if it was a real life work item, and although I won't be writing tests for the second one. So the first step when you're starting a kata would obviously be to read the description, the README file. But what makes it hard is to extract the requirements from plain English. So that'd be kind of your first step. So the goal is to extract the requirements from plain English text. And to help you with that, try extracting keywords. Okay. So in the Amazon kata, we already have the AC nicely written down. And most of the keywords have already been highlighted. So we've got a customer buying, buys would be another keyword, an item. And then the item gets dispatched, so that'll be another keyword by the warehouse. The reason why we highlight words is to try to conceptualize what classes can help us achieve our goal. So if I go to the Amazon kata, by the way, I've emptied out all the code and all the tests before starting. We can see that we've got a warehouse class, and it's got a dispatch method, and it's got a customer argument, and the same method also as an item argument. So highlighting those keywords helps us map the plain English words into lines of code. The second step would be to prove your understanding of the requirement. So something that you can do is ask yourself, what's the simplest pass or fail test that I can write? Okay, so I'm gonna write that as the next step. So you need to prove your understanding of the requirement. And to achieve that, you can ask yourself for the simplest valuable pass-fail test that you can write. Okay, so I'm going to do that next. So if I go to the Amazon class, okay, I'm going to instantiate an Amazon, and then I'm going to say this method. So should dispatch item from warehouse after purchase. Okay, so we want to buy an item. Let me create a customer for that and an item. So that's the price, and then it's a toaster, let's say. So when we buy an item, we want to make sure the warehouse dispatches the item. Oh, haven't got a warehouse. So let's create a warehouse. So when we buy an item, we want to make sure that the warehouse dispatches the item to the customer. And having written this test has proves to ourselves that we know what the requirement is. So that's why writing tests or test-driven development is important. Okay. Um, if you can't quite make the jump between, well, sorry, from writing the test to the code, then I would suggest helping yourself with diagrams, or drawing anything in general. So that'd be my third step if it's not immediately obvious what you need to do after writing the test. Okay, so there are diagrams that you find useful. I find sequence diagrams quite useful. Um, the goal of drawing diagrams is for you to work out dependencies. So diagrams are useful to establish dependencies between classes. So I'm gonna show you an example of how I do that. So I've drawn a very simple sequence diagram. Okay. So at the moment we've only got the Amazon class, and when a customer buys an item, then we would expect the item to be dispatched to the customer via the warehouse. So this diagram is useful for a couple of reasons. The first one is that it highlights what the entry point is, and the second one is because it's going to help me establish what's the relationship between the Amazon and the warehouse classes. The fact that there is an arrow from the Amazon class to the warehouse class um, tells me that the Amazon class depends on the warehouse class. So now I am safe, or I am secure enough to establish that relationship in the test too. Okay. Cool. You don't always necessarily need to to draw the diagram, but you might find it. I find it useful personally. Okay. So once that I've established the relationships, then all I need to do is write the code. So I'm gonna do that now. So that'd be the next step. Okay. So it's very simple. I just need so let's wire in the warehouse, and I just need to dispatch it to the customer. Okay. Actually, let me comment out that line, and if we go back to that test, we should see it fail. I forgot about that. Very important though. Okay, so we've seen the test failing, and if we go back to the code and make it work again, the test should pass. Cool, perfect. Okay, so we've already completed the first IC of the kata, following these, how many? 3, 4, 5 steps. Okay, so let's try and achieve the second requirement following the same steps. So let's look at the first step. So we try to extract the requirements from plain English text, and we look for keywords. Okay, so when a customer buys an item, they have to pay for it with the wallet. So again, it's very similar. The keywords would be customer, buys, item, and then wallet. So if we look at the wallet class, there's a bill method that takes a customer and an amount. Okay. So yeah, I think from that we can already establish what we need for the next step, which is to prove our understanding of the requirement, we need to ask ourselves what's a simple valuable pass-fail test that we can write. So we'll do that. So supposing we also had a wallet, so should bill customer on purchase. Okay, so when we buy an item, we need to verify that the customer gets billed via the wallet. Okay, so let me run that test. Okay, so unsurprisingly, the new test is failing. If it wasn't immediately obvious for me how to write the code, then I would try to draw it out on a diagram and conceptualize it. And I would also try to establish the dependencies between classes. So yeah, let's do that. Okay, so there we go. So we also have our wallet in action now. So before dispatching an item, we need to pay for it. And this arrow in this direction um, tells us that the Amazon service or class depends on the wallet class. So we can go back to the test and establish that relationship. So the Amazon class, depends on the wallet. Okay. Also realize that the sequence diagram acts pretty much as pseudocode. Yeah. So that's why it's called a sequence diagram. So somebody buys an item from Amazon, then the customer gets billed using the wallet, and then it gets dispatched. So now I can just take that back to the actual code and write that. Okay, so that should be all of the code that I need. So if I execute the test again, it should pass. Cool, perfect. So we've used the steps that we've written out here to start our kata. I could follow through with the other two requirements here, but I don't think it's necessary. What I will do now is jump to the surfing kata, and I'm gonna make it a little bit harder to make it more realistic and make it look more like a real life work item. So what I'm gonna do for this is first write what the whole surfing kata would look like in plain English. Okay, so if I had to summarize the surfing kata in two sentences, that would be something along the lines of send an hourly phone notification. Oops. I'll just write it down and read it out later. Okay, so there it is. I've written it down. So the summarized surfing kata would be send an hourly phone notification for each city nearby a user or the phone's user, where they can go surfing. For each city where they can go surfing. And the definition of a beach where you can go surfing, sorry, of a city where you can go surfing is having a beach and there being good or great weather. And if there's good weather, then the requirement is to only send a notification. And if there's great weather, the requirement is to send a notification with a vibration. Okay. So I'm also gonna, when you work with a real life work item, you also I've also prepared a couple of tips that fit better for a harder work item. So those would be, instead of just thinking about simple test cases, ask yourself how your QA is going to test this work item. So okay, because chances are if you don't know how to test it, then the QA will not know how to test it. And if you think that it's going to be complicated to test it, it probably means that you're going to have to help them out, or that it's going to be complicated um, to implement. So thinking about how to QA it helps you identify complex areas so that you can tackle them early on. Okay. Another suggestion that I have is to keep the diagram simple. And we'll see why in a minute. And then the other suggestion I would have is to map um, function functionality to areas of the code in your system. So the other relevant piece of information that you can get from the keywords um, is to map them to areas of your code. So functionality, map business functionality to areas of your code. Hopefully this will make more sense once we start with the exercise. Okay. Um, cool. So in this case, if I was to ask myself how the QA would test it, I would think that they'd have a phone and that they would try to get a notification, um, say between 11 and 12, when they were located nearby a city that had a beach with good weather conditions. Um, and obviously, instead of having to send them to a particular city, I'd have to think of how to simulate the phone being located near a city with good weather conditions and a beach. Okay, cool. So let's start with the first um, step, which would be to identify the keywords. Um, so here I think the keywords would be hourly, phone notification, city nearby, and then the definition of surfing, which is there being a beach with good, great weather. Okay. So, and then we've got we've already highlighted notification, and then that includes vibration. Okay. So after I've extracted the keywords, I'm going to use the last tip that I've written here, which is to map business functionality to areas of my code. Okay. So in my code, I'm going to look for places where I can send phone notifications, but also where I can get cities nearby, cities nearby, and then also look for places in the code where I can see that I can find out if a city has a beach and whether there are there are good or great weather conditions. Okay, so if I jump to the code now and I go straight for the surfing kata. Okay, I can see I've got oh, I thought I had deleted everything. Let me delete everything except for the method name. Boop. Okay, sorry for that. Let me empty out the test. I did empty the test. Fine. So we got the surfing up. So that's going to be the entry point. But then we've got the clock up, which maps to the hourly keyword. We've also got phone notification, and we've got a notifier app for that, and that's got a notify, and it's also got a notify and vibrate methods. And then we've also got this notion of cities nearby, and we got the GPS app for that. So there's a get cities nearby method that gives a list of cities. And then there's the notion of what surface, what good and great weather conditions are. And I'm not going to focus. The kata actually describes some funky conditions, but I'm not going to go into those into detail because it's not important for this video. Cool. And the notion that cities have a beach, so then we can also go to the city method, and we know that this guy has beach method. Okay, so I've done this whole thing really quickly. The whole mapping business functionality to areas of my code. But if it wasn't obvious straight away, then I'd have to go back and spend some time looking at my project and identifying what classes provide which functionality. And only after feeling comfortable with my knowledge of my source code would I be able to then work on it. Okay. So after doing the first step and helping myself with the 2 new tips, I would go into proving my understanding of the requirement by asking myself what's the simplest valuable pass or fail test that I could write. I'm not going to go into it just to shorten the video, but I would write a test that verifies that if the clock up was at 12 o'clock and the user was near a city that had a beach and where the weather conditions were good, then I verify that the notify method gets called. Cool. And after writing that method, or well, that test case, then we can jump into the next step, which is to draw out diagrams that you find useful, like the sequence diagram. Okay. So here's where the last tip, or sorry, second to last tip that I wrote kicks in. So try to keep your diagrams simple. Diagrams are just to help you conceptualize what the problem is. They're not there to be completely perfect. So I'll show you what I mean by that. If I was to write down that's interesting, that should update. So if I was to write down the whole sequence diagram, sorry, I was miffed there for a minute. I thought that's not what I was expecting. If I was to write down the whole sequence diagram for the exercise, I'd be writing something like this. Let me bring this here. Okay. So the surfing up is the entry point, and it's got an alert on good weather conditions method. And then it needs to get the current time from the clock up. And then if the time is on the o'clock time, then we need to also interact with the GPS app to get the nearby cities. And then we need to look for each city. We need to find out if it's got a beach, and only if it's got a beach, then we need to get the weather conditions for that beach from the weather app. And if there are great weather conditions, then we need to notify and vibrate using the notifier app. And if there are only good weather conditions, then we just simply notify again using the notifier app. Now, the downside of this diagram is that it's very convoluted. It's very complex, and it doesn't help a lot. So a simpler version of this diagram that achieves exactly the same thing would be not that one. Hang on. This one here. Okay. So again, it's it's very similar to the previous one, but I've taken all the complexity out and I've just written nodes. So rather than having all those loops and if statements, I've just written them as nodes. So whereas before we had a big box here, now I've only got a node saying, well, exit if it's not on a o'clock time, and then after calling the or requesting for the nearby cities from the GPS app, then I've made a node here to iterate uh, through the nearby cities. And then I've also made a note here again for the other if conditions saying on great or good weather conditions, then you could go to the notifier app. So it's taken out all of the complex part of drawing the diagram and all of the detail, but I still get the same outcome, which is to find out what are the dependencies between the classes. So the surfing app is pretty much dependent on every other class. And in this case, it's quite simple because the katas are relatively simple. But if you had a complex project with a lot of classes, then you could imagine this diagram being more complex. So the clock app might depend on the GPS app, and the weather app might depend on the notifier app, and so on and so forth. So now I've got this. I can use this pretty much as pseudocode to start writing my code. So let me do that. Okay, so first I need to use the clock app. Okay. Okay, and then I would write here if the condition for the current time being on the hour. So that would be get minute. Okay, and then if you remember on the simple diagram, we said to exit if it's on an o'clock time. So we can do that by just going on here and saying return. Perfect. Okay, so now I can go back to my diagram and say, okay, if I carry on, then I try to get the nearby cities from the GPS app. Oops, sorry. Okay, so we need the dependency on the GPS app. Okay. And once we get the nearby cities, we need to only consider the ones that have a beach and get the good weather conditions for them. So, yep, let's do that. So we only want to consider the ones that have a beach. And then for each one of those, we want to get the weather conditions. So again, we've got a new dependency. How do you call it? Weather app. That's it. Okay, so for each city with a beach, we get the weather conditions. Okay, and then we do if great conditions. Then again, let's go back to, well, let's just write the else if. Good. Okay, so this would just be private methods. I'm not going to go into detail of those, of what qualifies as great weather conditions or just plain good weather conditions, because it's not really relevant. Okay, but if any of those conditions is true, Or if the first condition is true, then we want to notify and vibrate, and in the second case, we just want to notify, okay, to the notifier app. So again, there's an extra dependency. No, notifier app. Okay. So on great weather conditions, you notify and vibrate with a relevant message. And if it's just simply good weather conditions, then you just notify another relevant message. Okay, and then we verify that our test passes. So we've pretty much finished the surfing app kata by just following the steps here, or these steps. Hope you found them useful, and yeah, goodbye.